Devastated by the ruin of everything he had built, Viscount Ashford died by suicide. Cordelia found his body in his study one morning, with a household ledger open on his desk showing the full extent of the debts in his own handwriting. She sat with his body for 2 hours reading the ledger before she called the household. London, October, 1819. The wedding candles at Rothmere House burned down to their brass holders before the Duke of Rothmere showed his bride what she had married into. She had been expecting the cold. She had not been expecting the book. It was slim, leather-bound, the colour of old burgundy, the kind of colour that suggests dried blood to anyone who has seen enough of it. He set it on the escritoire between them with the ease of a man producing something he had handled so many times its weight had become ordinary. Like a favourite pen. Like a glass of wine he always poured himself before bed. Lady Cordelia Ashford, 18 years old, daughter of the late Viscount Edmund Ashford, now Duchess of Rothmere, by the signatures of 3 solicitors, and the silence of a father who was no longer alive to object, sat in the chair across from him and did not look at the book immediately. She looked at his hands. Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, was 42 years old. He had inherited his title at 28 and had spent the 14 years since transforming it from a respectable name into something considerably more dangerous. A commercial empire built on the systematic destruction of competitors. His hands were large and unhurried. He wore no rings. Men who had real power, she had observed in the weeks of formal courtship that preceded this evening, rarely decorated themselves. Decoration was for men who needed to signal what they were. Rothmere did not need to signal anything. He was the most dangerous man she had ever been in a room with. She had known this before the wedding. She had known it before the engagement. She had known it the morning she woke to find her father's body and the household ledger open on his desk. The debts listed in his handwriting with the particular precision of a man who wanted to leave an accurate record even at the end. She had sat with her father's body for 2 hours before she called for anyone. She had spent those 2 hours reading the ledger. "You are wondering," Rothmere said now, "what kind of man you've married." Cordelia said nothing. In 1819, the average age of marriage for upper-class English women was 17 to 20. Girls were not legally considered adults until 21. Cordelia, at 18, is legally a minor, and upon marriage, her legal identity has been entirely absorbed into her husband's. She cannot vote, own property, or appear in court without him. She is, by the law of her time, invisible. Then I'll show you. He opened the book. The next hour was the most precise education of Cordelia Ashford's life. Not in the content of the ledger, she had suspected most of it. She had spent the 6 weeks between the engagement and the wedding doing what her father had taught her to do with any route she did not yet understand. She had mapped it. She had read everything publicly available about Rothmere's financial operations, had spoken carefully with 3 of her father's former associates who had survived their encounters with Rothmere's apparatus, had built, in the privacy of her childhood bedroom, in the diminished Ashford townhouse, a picture that was approximately correct. The ledger confirmed the picture, and it added details she had not had. 41 entries, 41 names, the methodology for each, the timeline, the outcome. Each entry written in Rothmere's own hand, precise and unhurried, in the same ink he used for estate correspondence. Her father was on page 29. Viscount E. Ashford. Ashford Shipping Network. Method: credit disruption via Barclay correspondence. Shipping intelligence fed to competitor. Key agent Whitmore discredited through fabricated correspondence. Timeline: 22 months. Outcome: network dissolved. Assets absorbed. She read it. She read it in the same tone of careful attention she had brought to shipping manifests since she was 11 years old, sitting on the library floor with her father's maps spread around her like a paper sea. She did not cry. She had already cried. She had cried for exactly 9 minutes on the morning she found him, alone in his study with the door locked, before she washed her face and called the household to order and began the business of being the last Ashford standing. She had given herself 9 minutes then. She would not give herself any here. Rothmere was watching her face for the breakdown. She could feel him watching. Men like him watched for breakdowns the way collectors watch for cracks in porcelain, with the particular, anticipatory attention of someone who found damage interesting. She kept her face entirely still. "You see it all clearly," he said. His voice carried genuine appreciation, the appreciation of a man recognizing quality in an instrument he has purchased. "Good. I don't require you to pretend ignorance. I require you to comprehend what you are part of." He closed the ledger. Set it on the escritoire with the same unhurried ease. "You are the Duchess of Rothmere. Your cooperation, your performance of our marriage, your presence in the correct rooms, your silence on certain matters is what I purchased when I retired your father's debts and gave his name a dignified exit." He stood. Not a difficult arrangement, not a cruel one, simply clear. He walked to the adjoining door. "Sleep well, Duchess." He paused without turning. "The book will be locked away in the morning. You will not see it again." The door closed. Cordelia sat in the bridal chamber of Rothmere House in the year 1819, in a country where she had no legal identity, no property, no recourse, and no standing in any court in the land. She sat for exactly 9 minutes. Then she stood, crossed to the escritoire, opened the ledger to page 1, and began to read from the beginning. Not from grief, not from anger, from the same methodical attention her father had taught her to give to any route she intended to navigate. Because Cordelia Ashford had understood something in the moment Rothmere showed her the book, something he had not understood he was showing her. He thought he was demonstrating his power. He was demonstrating his method. And methods, properly studied, could be reversed. She read until the candles ran out. In the darkness, she did not reach for a new one. She sat with what she had learned and let it settle into the architecture of what she already knew. Her father had spent 30 years building something honest. Rothmere had taken 22 months to destroy it. She had given herself 2 years. Outside, London breathed its October cold against the windows of Rothmere House. Inside, something had begun that Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, would not understand until it was too late to stop. December 1819. The legal doctrine governing Cordelia's situation was called coverture, from the French couverture, meaning a covering. Under English common law since the Norman conquest, a married woman's legal existence was covered by her husband's. She ceased to exist as a separate legal entity. This was not merely social custom, it was codified law, enforced by courts, and treated as natural order by the majority of educated society. A woman who challenged it was not merely unconventional. She was, by definition, acting outside the law. The first month of the marriage, Cordelia did exactly what was expected of her. She received callers with the gracious warmth appropriate to a new duchess. She attended the social engagements Rothmere required, the political dinners, the club evenings where wives were displayed briefly, and then left to their own conversations. She wore what was selected for her. She smiled at the men who needed to be impressed by the evidence of Rothmere's domestic contentment. She was, by every visible measure, exactly the acquisition he had calculated. What she was doing beneath that surface required considerably more care than the surface. Because Cordelia had a problem that most revenge stories never adequately addressed. She had no money, no legal right to money, no property, no standing. Under the doctrine of coverture, every penny of the Ashford settlement, the money Rothmere had used to retire her father's debts, was his. The clothes on her back were his. The room she slept in was his. If she walked out of Rothmere House tomorrow with a sixpence in her pocket, the sixpence was legally his. This was not metaphor. This was the law of England in 1819. The mechanisms available to her were therefore not the obvious ones. Not money, not legal action, not formal testimony. What she had was information, and what information required was not courts, it required people. She began with the servants, not dramatically, not through recruitment or conspiracy, through the patient, ordinary, daily practice of attention. She learned their names in her first week, not from the household register, but from them directly. She asked about their families, their origins, the length of their service. She was not performing warmth for strategic ends. She was genuinely interested, because her father had taught her that any network, commercial or human, was built from individual nodes, and nodes were not abstract. They were specific people with specific histories and specific things they cared about. By the end of the first month, the servants of Rothmere House had formed the impression, accurate, as it happened, that the new Duchess was the first person who would ever notice them. Phinia, her personal maid, had been with her since childhood. 43 years old, small, silver-haired, possessed of a memory so comprehensive it was almost unsettling. She had spent 20 years learning the specific skill of invisibility, the ability to be present in a room without registering as a relevant presence. This skill made her, in the context of what Cordelia was building, an instrument of extraordinary precision. The study, Cordelia said, on their third evening, when Rothmere had left for his club, he locks the lower left drawer. Phinia said nothing. I am not asking you to open it. I am asking you to note what correspondence arrives, which visitors come to the study, and how long they stay. That I can do, Phinia said. And the housekeeper, Mrs. Garvell. She was with the previous household. She knew the first Duchess. Lady Isadora, Phinia said. Her voice held a specific quality, not grief, but the careful neutrality of someone choosing how much to offer, not the neutrality of indifference. The neutrality of someone who had been waiting for the right person to ask. I would like to speak with Mrs. Garvell, not about Lady Isadora directly, about the household during that period, the management of it, the patterns. She may not speak freely. I'm not asking for freely. I'm asking for honestly. There's a difference. Phinia looked at her for a moment, with those small, precise, grey eyes. You have thought about this a great deal, she said. Since the night of the wedding, Cordelia said. What she did not say, what she would not say to anyone. Not even Phinia was the other thing she had thought about since the night of the wedding. She had thought about Isadora Vale, the first Duchess. Married at 23, dead at 26. Of fever, according to the parish register. According to the 3 people Cordelia had quietly spoken with in the weeks before the wedding, none of whom had offered anything definitive, but all of whom had hesitated in the specific way that people hesitate when they know something they have decided never to say the fever had been real. What had happened to Isadora during the fever had not been discussed. Not then, not ever. Cordelia had filed this under last. There was an order to things. The commercial case had to come first, because it would be tried in a court that required documentary evidence, and she had the documents. The question of Isadora required something different. A witness, a specific kind of witness, one who had been silent for 4 years and might be made to speak, and that required a channel she did not yet have. She would get to Isadora, but first she needed to build the channel. In December, at a formal dinner at Lord Carrick's house, she found it. His name was Calum Dray. He was not a guest. He was present as part of the investigative apparatus attached to Bow Street, the city's principal professional detective institution, established 70 years earlier under the magistrate Henry Fielding. The Bow Street runners operated from 1749 until they were superseded by the Metropolitan Police in 1829. They were professional investigators who wore plain clothes and operated through surveillance, informant networks, and documentary evidence. They had no power to compel testimony, no authority to seize banking records, and no formal relationship with commercial institutions. Their power came entirely from persistence and the weight of cases they had successfully built. She found out his name through Lord Carrick's footman. She looked at the card for a long time. Calum Dray, Bow Street. Investigations conducted with absolute discretion. She wrote a letter that evening. Short, precise, unsigned, no name, no house address, a meeting place, the lending library on Barnard Lane, Tuesday at 2 o'clock. She signed it with a single word. Ashford. If you're still here after the first 2 chapters, you already know this story is different. It doesn't just entertain, it shows you the real world these women lived in, the real laws that trapped them, and what it actually took to fight back. Hit subscribe to Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles right now. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and tell me this. If you were Cordelia, with no legal rights, no money, no standing, what would you have done? Every single comment gets read. Like, share, and ring that bell. Because what happens next will change the way you see the word powerless forever. January 1820. Calum Dre arrived at the Barnard Lane Lending Library 7 minutes early and read the spines of books until 2 o'clock, because reading spines told you what kind of people used a place. This particular library served a mixed clientele. The calligraphy, instruction manuals, and volumes of improving sermons suggested the respectable middle class. The worn French novels in the corner suggested people who did not care what their neighbors thought. The heavily consulted section on estate law and commercial practice suggested something more specific. He was thinking about this when she walked in. He recognized the quality of her immediately, not because he paid attention to fashion, but because he paid attention to how people moved. Most people walked into rooms. She entered a room the way he had seen experienced soldiers enter uncertain territory, assessing, choosing a position, establishing a sightline to the exit before anything else. She was young. She wore grey wool. She carried a small leather case. She sat across from him and said, without preamble, "You've been retained to investigate losses connected to the Rothmere commercial network." "Who told you that?" "I mapped it. The families who retained you share a specific pattern in the timing and mechanism of their losses. That pattern matches documented methodology. The documentation is in this case." She set the leather case on the table between them. "I am providing this to you as background for your investigation. I have no legal standing to commission you directly. My name does not appear on any of this documentation and will not appear in any formal proceeding." He looked at the case. He looked at her. "You are his wife," he said. "I am the woman whose legal identity was absorbed by his upon our marriage under the doctrine of coverture," she said. "That is a different thing." He opened the case. What was inside was not what he had expected. He had expected something emotional, accusations, grievances. What he found was something considerably more structured. A timeline, precise, documented, cross-referenced. Credit withdrawals, shipping schedule disruptions, the identities of intermediary figures flagged with sufficient contextual detail that any competent investigator could verify them. Notes on the methodology, how it matched patterns in 3 other documented collapses he was aware of, and 2 he had not yet connected. It was the work of someone who had spent a long time looking at the same picture from multiple angles. "You built this from inside his house," he said. "I built this before I entered his house. I completed it after." He looked up. There was something specific in the way she said completed, not like someone describing a task, but like someone describing a decision, a Rubicon. "Your father taught you the commercial structure. You already understood the network before he destroyed it." "Yes." Her voice was entirely level. "I watched him do it. I understood each step as it happened and could not stop any of it, because I was 18 years old, a woman, and legally irrelevant to every institution that could have helped." A silence. "I am 31 years old," Calum said. "I have investigated commercial fraud for 9 years. I have never built a case this structured." "You've never had 2 years and a motive," she said. He almost smiled. A very small, very controlled expression that appeared briefly and then disappeared, like a light in a window. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to pursue the investigation through your formal channels. I want you to build a case that has legal standing, something I cannot build because I have no legal personhood. I will continue to provide background documentation as you need it. I will direct you to sources who can speak directly, people with standing, people whose testimony can be formally received. And when the case is built, Then it is your case. My name is not on it. My involvement is not documented. I am the Duchess of Rothmere attending a lending library on a Tuesday afternoon. He was quiet for a long moment. This is not standard, he said. No! If this reaches a magistrate, and it emerges that the primary source of the investigation's structure was his wife, then it will need to have been corroborated sufficiently through independent channels that my contribution is incidental. That is why I am giving you the methodology rather than the evidence. The evidence must be yours, gathered through your means. What I am giving you is the map. He looked at the documentation again. He thought about the 3 families who had retained him. He thought about the pattern he had been trying to resolve for 4 months without a key. He thought about the woman across from him, in the grey dress, with the leather case, in the lending library on Barnard Lane, in January of 1820, with no legal existence, and a map that was better than anything he had. All right, he said. She stood. She picked up the now empty case and walked toward the door. Your Grace. She turned. There is one more thing. The first Duchess, Isadora Vale. She was very still for a moment, not surprised. He noticed that she was not surprised. She had been waiting for him to ask, had been measuring whether he would. That file, she said, is the last one. Not yet. Build everything else first. Why last? Because if you go to that before you have the commercial case built, it looks like a grieving wife who has constructed a murder accusation against her husband. The commercial case is documented fact. It establishes the pattern. It establishes the methodology. It establishes the kind of man he is. When that exists in the record, and you then bring the question of Isadora, it doesn't look like accusation. It looks like confirmation. He held her gaze. You've been planning this since before the wedding. I've been planning this since the morning I read my father's ledger, she said. Not his, mine. My father kept records too. The difference between them was what they recorded. She left. Calum sat at the library table and thought about the specific weight of a situation in which the most competent investigator of a crime was the one person the law had made invisible. He thought about the word coverture, covering, the law that made her invisible. He picked up the first document. He began to read. And in the reading, he understood fully, for the first time, that the woman who had walked out of this library was not seeking justice. She was engineering it. The distinction, he would come to understand, mattered enormously. April 1820. In Regency England, women of the upper class operated an extensive informal network, largely invisible to men, and almost entirely unrecorded in official documents. This network moved through morning calls, correspondence, charitable work, and church committees. It was not political in the formal sense. Women had no vote, no parliamentary voice, no institutional standing. But it shaped reputations, managed information, and could alter the social standing of any individual within its reach. Historians have called this the parallel economy of influence. The morning call was the engine of society. Every day, between 11 and 2, women of rank visited each other in a fixed and understood rotation, 15 minutes per call, no more. You said almost nothing of substance. You observed everything. Cordelia made her morning calls every day that the social calendar permitted. By the end of February, she was one of the most diligently present new duchesses in London. She remembered everything. She was warm without being effusive, interested without being interrogative, and she had the specific quality that made her valuable in social rooms. She made the person she was speaking with feel, correctly, that she had noticed something about them that no one else had noticed. This was not manipulation. It was accurate perception, expressed. The women she was interested in were not the powerful hostesses, not the political wives. She was interested in the ones who had been hurt. In the specific, muffled way that women of her class absorbed damage through husbands who had lost something and came home diminished, through family names that had once meant more. Lady Ursula Harp was 44. Her husband, Sir Gideon, had been a mid-level shipping merchant, whose routes had overlapped the Ashford network. He had lost them 5 years ago in a collapse whose mechanism bore a specific signature. Sir Gideon believed it had been misfortune. Cordelia knew it had been design. On the 6th visit, she told Lady Ursula the truth. Not all of it. Enough for the pattern to resolve for someone who had been carrying a half-understood picture for 5 years. Lady Ursula sat very still. Then she said, quietly, "Gideon has always believed it was his own fault." "It was not," Cordelia said. The relief of it was almost physical to witness. A woman's entire face reorganizing around a fact she had needed for 5 years and had not been given. What can be done? At the moment, nothing formally. The formal work is proceeding through other channels. What I am asking for is different Sir Gideon's correspondence from the period of the collapse. Any letters, contracts, or records from the 6 months before the roots were lost, and your discretion. "You are his wife," Lady Ursula said. "Yes. That is exactly the problem, and exactly the reason I can ask you instead of a solicitor." By April, Cordelia had conducted similar conversations with 7 other women. Not one refused. This was not because she was charming. It was because she was offering something that had not been offered to any of them before. An explanation. The confirmation that the damage was not misfortune. It was design. That their husbands had not failed. They had been pushed. Meanwhile, Calum was building. He traced the credit withdrawal pattern from the Ashford documentation through 2 banking houses. He identified an intermediary figure, a man named Thale, whose specific movements could be documented across 3 collapses. He wrote to Cordelia through the 2 intermediary chains she had established. She was the source. He was the investigator. The documentation was the root. The credit chain runs through a house on Cornhill. The agent T has been traced to 3 other collapses. I require corroboration of the timing. Does the source hold correspondence from the autumn of 1817 that would establish T's presence in the Ashford network during that period? She replied the following day. Sir Gideon Harp's correspondence from September to December 1817 includes 3 letters bearing T's signature as agent. The originals are available through Sir Gideon's solicitor, who has been briefed and is prepared to provide them through formal commercial channels if approached correctly. Sir Gideon is prepared to corroborate. Calum held that letter for a long time. She had, without any formal legal standing, managed to produce the corroboration he needed through a network of women whose existence the official record of England barely acknowledged. Then he wrote, "There is a second matter. The investigation has surfaced references to an incident 4 years ago connected to the household of R. I have not pursued it yet, as you asked. I have, however, encountered evidence that suggests the incident may be connected to the current pattern of methodology. I believe it should be examined. Do you agree?" She replied within hours, "Yes, but carefully." The physician who attended the first household is now retired and living in Whitechapel. His name is Dr. Mail Orens. He has not been approached by anyone. He should be approached by you, not through my network. He will need to feel that what he says will be received through a legitimate channel. He is carrying something. I know it from what Mrs. Garvell did not say when I asked about that period. What Mrs. Garvell did not say. Calum read that line 3 times. He thought about the specific art of reading absences. The Duchess of Rothmere had been trained by a father who mapped shipping routes. She had learned to read what was there. And then out of necessity, out of the specific constraints of being a woman in a world that did not record women, she had learned to read what was missing. He went to Whitechapel, May 1820. In 1820, the legal definition of murder required proof of intention and proof of the specific cause of death. A physician who signed a death certificate attesting to natural causes was, unless contradicted by another physician, the definitive authority. This made the controlled administration of substances during a genuine illness almost impossible to prove retroactively unless the attending physician himself contradicted his own certificate. Dr. Mail Orens had been retired for 3 years. He lived in 2 rooms above a laundry in Whitechapel, modest rooms, kept cleanly, with the particular order of a man who had spent his life in organized environments and found disorder physically uncomfortable. He was 68. He had a cat. He answered the door himself. He looked at Caleb's Bow Street identification for a long time before stepping back to let him in. He did not appear surprised. "I have been expecting someone," he said, "for 4 years. I had begun to think no one would come." What he told Caleb over the following 3 hours was quiet and specific, delivered in the flat, careful language of a man who had spent years rehearsing it, not to make it compelling, but to make it accurate. Lady Isadora Vale had contracted a genuine fever in the autumn of 1815. The fever was real. The treatment that had been prescribed alongside Dr. Orens's standard course, prescribed not by him, but provided to the household by a separate apothecary on the instructions of the household steward, had been, as he discovered 3 weeks after her death, not a supplement to the treatment. It had been a counter to it. A specific combination of substances, administered in small quantities over 6 weeks, that suppressed the body's ability to recover from exactly the kind of fever Isadora had. Not immediately lethal. Gradual. The kind of thing that, in the presence of a genuine illness, looked entirely like the illness progressing. He had signed the certificate in good faith. He had discovered the truth after when he had, for reasons he described as a professional inability to leave an uncertain case unexamined, reviewed the medication records. By the time he understood what he was looking at, the household steward had been dismissed. The apothecary had moved, and Dr. Orens had received, without explanation, a sum of money deposited to his account at the bank on Grace Church Street, from a source he could not trace. He understood the message. "I am a coward," he said. It was said with the flat, clean precision of a man stating a documented fact about himself. I was 54 years old. I had a practice, a name, a family. I understood what the money meant, and I chose my practice over the truth. He looked at his hands. I have lived with that every day for 4 years. "Write it down," Caleb said. "Everything, in as much detail as you can produce. Sign it, date it, have it witnessed by someone of good standing in the parish. Then keep it with your solicitor. And then, when the time comes, you tell me whether you are prepared to allow it to be formally received." Orens looked at him for a long moment. "Is there a case being built?" "There is. Will it amount to something? Or will it be buried by money and solicitors the way these things are always buried?" Caleb thought about Cordelia, about the network she was building through morning calls and borrowed correspondence, about the specific, invisible architecture of women who technically did not exist in the official record of England and had nonetheless built something that would bring a duke to trial. "It will not be buried," he said. He walked back from Whitechapel through the May City and thought about Isadora Vale, who had been 26 when she died, whose husband had attended the funeral with appropriate composure and had, within 2 years, been in negotiation for the Ashford network. He thought about a ledger with 41 entries. He thought, Isadora was not in the ledger. That means she was not a problem to be managed. She was a variable to be eliminated. He thought, what kind of man keeps a record of his commercial crimes and leaves no record of his most intimate one? The kind who does not consider it a crime at all. The kind who considers it a decision. He met Cordelia the following week at a charitable committee meeting, one of 6 such institutions she had joined. All of them joined through the recognized avenue of a duchess taking up her social responsibilities, which Rothmere had approved without interest. They communicated through the formal code they had developed. An inquiry proceeding. A source confirmed. A timeline assembled. That evening, he wrote, "The physician's testimony is available. The evidence is sufficient for a formal complaint on the question of the first household, independent of the commercial inquiry. I am prepared to file both simultaneously. The question is timing." She replied the following morning, "Not yet. The commercial inquiry must lead." Rothmere's response to the commercial inquiry will be to protect his financial interests. He will commit his legal resources and his attention to that front. A man defending one position is formidable. A man defending two simultaneous positions divides his resources and makes errors. We wait until the commercial inquiry is formally received by the magistrate. Then we file the second matter within 48 hours. He read this. He thought about the military quality of her thinking, the instinct for position, the timing that created maximum disadvantage for the opponent. He wrote back, "Understood." One question, unrelated to the investigation. "How are you managing the daily situation in the house?" A longer pause than usual. Then, "I manage it the way one manages a route through difficult water. Carefully, with full attention, without letting the difficulty show on the surface." He sat with that for a long time. Then, "You should not have to do that." Her reply came at midnight. "No, but I do. And when it is finished, I will not have to anymore. That is enough to continue." He read that last line 3 times. He thought about the specific weight of enough. Not comfort, not certainty, just enough. The specific sustaining minimum of a person who had calculated exactly how much they needed and was running on precisely that. He did not write back that night. He thought about writing back. He did not do it. June 1820. Cordelia found the key to the locked drawer on the 47th morning of her marriage. The key was kept in the 3rd book from the left, on the 2nd shelf of the study bookcase, a volume of Greek military history attached to a ribbon the exact colour of the binding. She found it on a Tuesday when Rothmere was at his club and Phineas was stationed in the corridor. She took the key. She opened the drawer. She read what was there: 6 letters, 2 contracts, and a document from a private banking house on Lombard Street, and replaced everything in the exact order she had found it. She locked the drawer. She replaced the key. She returned to the morning room and completed the letter she had been writing. What she had read was the final piece. The Lombard Street banking house was not in Calem's investigation because it was not connected to the commercial network collapse. It was connected to something different. A specific trust structured 20 years ago for the financial benefit of a party whose name she recognized from the ledger. Not a victim, a beneficiary. She needed 3 days to understand the full implication. She spent those 3 days in the ordinary machinery of her life: morning calls, committee meetings, the performance of domestic contentment that was her daily work. On the evening of the 2nd day, Rothmere came home from his club 2 hours early. This had never happened before. She had spent 5 months learning his patterns, and this was not in them. She heard his step in the entrance hall from the morning room, where she sat with her journal open before her, not the coded one, the visible one, full of household accounts and social correspondence. She closed it. She set her pen down. She folded her hands in her lap. He came to the doorway of the morning room and stood there looking at her with the specific, calibrating attention she had learned to monitor the way a sailor monitors weather. He was looking at her differently. Not suspiciously, assessingly, with the particular quality of attention of a man who has been told something that made him revise a settled conclusion. "You were at Lord Ashby's salon this afternoon," he said. "I was," she said. "Lord Ashby mentioned that you had been speaking with Lady Whitmore about the Harp family." Her pulse did not change. She had been prepared for this, had known, in the abstract, that the social network she was building would eventually produce an echo that reached him. She had planned for it. She had a prepared answer. But she had not planned for the specific quality of his attention tonight. Something in it was sharper than usual. Something had changed. "Lady Whitmore and I spoke about the Harp estate," she said. "Sir Gideon has been unwell. She was concerned about him." "The Harp estate." He repeated it with a flatness that was not quite a question. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "The Harp estate collapsed 5 years ago," he said, "through a series of credit arrangements that proved unsustainable. Sir Gideon's mismanagement of his northern routes." Lady Whitmore mentioned the northern routes. "Yes," Cordelia said. She found the whole business very sad. She held his gaze with the complete stillness she had spent 5 months building. Not innocence, not performance. The accurate neutrality of a woman who had built her system so that no single element of it was visible from the outside? He found nothing, but she saw, in the moment before he nodded and withdrew, something she had not seen before in his face. Not suspicion, something closer to curiosity. The intellectual interest of a man who had encountered a variable he had not accounted for, and was beginning to file it under worth watching. When his footsteps had retreated down the corridor, and the study door had closed, Cordelia sat for a full minute without moving. Then she reached for her pen and wrote one line in the household accounts book written in the visible journal, in plain English, between two entries about linen costs. Timeline has moved. The second front must open within 6 weeks, or the first is compromised. She would encode it and send it tomorrow. Tonight, she sat very still in the morning room and breathed slowly and did something she had not allowed herself to do in 5 months. She was afraid. Not of failing. She had mapped the failure modes and prepared for each of them. She was afraid of something smaller and more specific. She was afraid that when this was over, when the mechanism had run its course, and the courts had done what courts did, she would discover that she had become someone she did not recognize. That the woman who had walked into Rothmere House to be an instrument would have become one. She gave herself 9 minutes. She counted them. When they were done, she closed the household accounts book, put the pen back in its holder, and went to check on the evening's dinner arrangements. Because the household required her attention, and the household was where her power lived, and she was not done yet. Not nearly. On the 4th day, she wrote to Calum, "There is a name in the Lombard Street Trust documents that I believe you need to know. It connects R's financial operations to a party who has been receiving funds through a structure that predates the marriage by 20 years. This party has a specific relationship to R that is not public knowledge, and that I believe is directly relevant to the pattern of the commercial crimes. I need to tell you this in person. The implications of it should be discussed, not written." He replied within the hour. "Name the place." She named the lending library. He arrived first. She arrived exactly on time. She sat down and said, "The trust documents contain a name. Dre." He was very still. "Not your name," she said. "The name that was given to a child who was relocated from the Rothmere household in 1800. The child of a woman his father had privately acknowledged." She looked at him directly. The trust was not established for the child. It was established for the handler, a payment for silence, structured as a trust so it could not be traced to a single transaction. The child was given the handler's surname. He grew up in Cheapside, with no knowledge of his origin. He said nothing. "I found it 8 months ago. I have carried it since then because I needed you to build your own case first, independently. I needed the case to be yours. Because if I told you first, and you continued building knowing this, any opposing solicitor could argue your investigation was driven by personal motivation rather than evidence." He looked at the table. "He is your half-brother," she said. "He arranged your removal from your own history. The trust documents prove it. They are also evidence in the broader pattern of the case." The room was very quiet. "You've thought about every angle of this," he said at last. "I have had very little else to do for the past 1.5 years. He looked at the table again. Then he looked up, and what was in his face was the thing she had been watching for and dreading simultaneously. The moment when the professional distance between them became something she could no longer maintain as the only kind of distance. "Are you safe?" he asked. "Right now, in that house." She was quiet for a moment. "He looked at me differently last night," she said. "I don't know yet what it means. It may mean nothing. It may mean we have less time than I calculated. How much less? I don't know. That is the first thing in 2 years that I don't know." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then we move faster," he said. "Yes. And if he moves against you before we're ready?" "Then I use what I have when I have it," she said. "Incomplete is better than nothing. Incomplete with good documentation is better than complete with none." He was quiet. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask the question that comes before the one you're building toward first, she said. He considered that. When this is finished, he said, where do you want to go? It was not the question she had expected. Not, are you safe again? Not, what do we do if, but where do you want to go? As if the answer to that mattered as much as any other element of the plan. She sat with it for a moment. Somewhere I don't have to be watching, she said. Somewhere the weather is what it says it is. He met her eyes. Scotland, he said. Ask me again when it's done, she said. I will, he said. And the way he said it, not as a performance, not as a comfort, but as a statement of intent, plain and certain, was the most dangerous thing anyone had said to her in 2 years. Because it made her want the afterwards. And wanting the afterwards was the one thing she could not afford until the work was complete. July, August, 1820. Bow Street runners built cases for presentation to a magistrate, who then determined whether there was sufficient evidence for formal prosecution. Commercial fraud cases in 1820 were pursued through a combination of magistrates' court and the higher civil courts. Criminal charges for more serious matters went through the grand jury, which had to determine whether an indictment was warranted before a full trial could be brought. The process was slow, expensive, and heavily weighted toward defendants with financial resources. This is why Cordelia's strategy had to be built on overwhelming documentary evidence rather than a single dramatic accusation. Calum filed the formal complaint with the Bow Street magistrate on the 3rd of July. 22 pages. Every page documented. Every document with a source. Every source with independent corroboration. The commercial fraud case built around 9 documented collapses, each traced through the specific methodology of credit disruption, agent manipulation, and the controlled erosion of competitor relationships. Sir Gideon Hart provided formal testimony on the 8th of July. The magistrate, Mr. Aldrich Wren, read the complaint over 2 days. On the 10th of July, he forwarded it to the commercial court with a recommendation for formal inquiry. On the 12th of July, the second complaint was filed. Dr. Mail Orange's written testimony witnessed, corroborated, built into something that met the evidentiary standard for a criminal inquiry into the death of Lady Isadora Vale. Magistrate Wren summoned Calum to his chambers on the 14th. This is extraordinary, Wren said. The word landed flat and precise, not admiration, an accurate descriptor. The source of the structure for the commercial complaint, Wren said carefully, did not come from your archive. I cannot confirm the sources of my background research. The documented evidence was gathered through formal channels. Wren looked at him. No, of course not. A pause. The Duke of Rothmere will have very good solicitors. Yes, this will be expensive, long, contested at every stage. Yes, and you are confident in the documentation. Every document is verified through at least 2 independent sources. The solicitors will not be able to challenge the evidence. They will challenge the process, the standing of witnesses, the admissibility of certain materials. Those challenges will fail. Wren studied him. Send the formal notification to the Duke of Rothmere's solicitors today. Both matters. Simultaneous. He paused. And run a dray. The woman who is being protected by the invisibility of her legal status in this inquiry when this is over, she should know that the law she circumvented protected her while it constrained her. Both things are true simultaneously. That is something worth knowing. I will convey that, Calum said. Rothmere received the formal notification on the 15th of July. Cordelia knew the moment he read it. She was in the morning room when she heard, through 2 closed doors, the specific quality of silence that followed a thing landing that had not been anticipated. Not a sound. An absence of the ordinary sounds, the movement, the ring of the bell for the steward, the automatic machinery of a man in his own house. A silence that lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then the bell rang. She returned to her letter. He came to find her at 11 o'clock. He walked into the morning room without knocking. He never knocked and stood in the doorway with the formal complaints in his hand. She looked up from her letter. His face was composed, but she had spent 18 months learning the specific micro-expressions of a man who had trained himself not to have micro-expressions, and she saw, in the particular quality of stillness around his jaw, what was happening. He was calculating. A commercial inquiry, he said, and a criminal inquiry into Isadora's death. I read the notification when it was delivered. I assumed you would want to know it had arrived. A silence. Do you have anything to tell me? He said. She looked at him. I am sure your solicitors will advise you well, she said. His eyes moved across her face with the specific, calibrating attention of a man looking for something he cannot quite locate. She held his gaze with the complete stillness she had spent 18 months building. He found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Not innocence, she had never been innocent, but the accurate neutrality of a woman who had built her system so that no single element of it touched her directly. He turned and left. She returned to her letter. Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken since the night of the wedding. She did not give herself any time now. There was still work. September-October, 11/20. The period 1819-1820 was a time of significant social upheaval in England. The Peterloo Massacre had occurred in August 1819, a cavalry charge against a peaceful reform rally that killed 15 people and injured hundreds. The resulting outrage produced the Six Acts, which restricted public assembly and the press. This political climate shaped the caution with which anyone challenging institutional power had to operate. A case against a duke required not just evidence, but the willingness of the official apparatus to engage with it, which, in this climate, was not guaranteed. The formal inquiries moved through the machinery of the courts at the pace of institutional England, slow, expensive, contested at every stage. Rothmere's solicitors were exceptional. They challenged the standing of 2 witnesses. They filed for the exclusion of 3 documentary sources on procedural grounds. They submitted 17 counter-arguments across both proceedings in the first month alone. Every challenge was addressed, completely. Because the documentation was verified through at least 2 independent sources, and the procedural challenges, while technically skilled, could not manufacture deficiencies that did not exist. What Rothmere's solicitors were actually doing, and what Cordelia recognized, because she had anticipated it was buying time, in the expectation that time would produce what money could sometimes produce, the erosion of witnesses, the quiet withdrawal of cooperation by parties who found the sustained attention of a powerful man's legal resources more than they had bargained for. Cordelia had anticipated this. She visited Sir Gideon Harp in September. She sat with Lady Ursula in the drawing room while Sir Gideon described what had happened in the preceding weeks, the letter from Rothmere's solicitors suggesting his testimony was based on misunderstanding. The subtle implication that continued cooperation would be costly. He is frightened, Lady Ursula said. He has reason to be. Rothmere has done this before. He has done it to every witness in every proceeding that has ever threatened to become inconvenient. Sir Gideon looked at her. What can you do about it? I cannot do anything formally, but I can tell you what the shape of this is. The pressure will continue for approximately 3 weeks. It will escalate in the 2nd week. In the 3rd week, an offer will be made, not explicit, but clear. A financial arrangement that addresses a specific vulnerability in your current position. The solicitors have researched your finances. They know where the pressure point is. Sir Gideon went pale. How do you know that? Because it is their methodology. It is documented. I have watched it applied to 41 parties over 20 years. The shape is consistent. If you hold, she said, the inquiry concludes. The pressure stops when there is nothing left to gain from it. I cannot tell you the holding will be easy. I can tell you that the outcome will be permanent. She said this with the specific certainty of someone who had designed the outcome herself. Sir Gideon looked at his wife. Lady Ursula looked at Cordelia. He will hold, Lady Ursula said. She made the same visit, with specific variations, to 3 other families. All of them held. But Rothmere was not finished. On the 23rd of September, Finea came to Cordelia's room at a time that was not their established meeting time, with an expression on her face that Cordelia had never seen before. In 3 years of service at Rothmere House, Finea had maintained the specific, polished neutrality of a woman who had survived by never being the most interesting thing in any room. She had been invisible by choice and by cultivation. The expression she wore now was neither neutral nor invisible. It was shaken. "He came to your rooms this afternoon," Finea said, "while you were at Lady Whitmore's." Cordelia was still. "He came himself?" "Yes. He did not bring the steward. He came alone. He went through the escritoire. I could hear it from the dressing room. He was systematic. He did not find your journal. It was where you leave it." Cordelia's visible journal, the household accounts, the social correspondence was always on the escritoire. The coded journal was in the locked box on the ribbon inside her stays. He could not have it without taking it from her person. He had not found anything, but he had come looking. How long did he stay? 11 minutes. Did he take anything? Nothing that I could tell. He replaced everything. He is very careful. Cordelia sat with this for a moment. "Finea," she said. "Yes. When did you decide to be on my side?" Finea was quiet for a moment. In 3 years, she had answered every question Cordelia had asked, without hesitation, without deflection, without the specific kind of pause that indicated calculation. This pause was different. It had feeling in it. "I was in this house," Finea said, "when Lady Isadora was ill. I was not her maid. I was a junior housemaid, but I was here. I saw the progression of her illness. I saw the apothecary, who came in through the servants' entrance at unusual hours. I saw what the steward carried from that apothecary to Lady Isadora's rooms." She paused. "I did not know what it meant then. I was 19 years old. Later I understood, and I have been in this house ever since, because I did not know what to do with what I understood, and I did not have anywhere to go, and then you arrived." A silence. "You have never told me this before," Cordelia said. "You never asked," Finea said. "And I needed to see what you were building before I told you. I needed to know it was going somewhere that mattered." Cordelia looked at her maid, at the woman she had known since childhood, who had been invisible by choice and by necessity, who had been carrying the specific weight of witnessed injustice for 11 years, with nowhere to put it. "I will need you to write it down," Cordelia said. "Everything you told me, with dates and details. I will tell you who to give it to and how." "I know," Finea said. "I have already written it. I have been writing it for 2 years. I was waiting for you to ask." She reached into the pocket of her plain grey dress and produced a sealed letter of 12 pages written in small, careful script. Cordelia held it in both hands. The weight of it was not paper. It was 11 years of a woman who had no legal existence, no standing, no institutional voice, who had watched something terrible and been unable to speak, who had waited and waited and waited for someone to build a channel she could pour it into. "Thank you," Cordelia said. It was inadequate. She knew it was inadequate. Finea knew it too. "Get him," Finea said simply. Cordelia wrote to Calum that evening. "R has searched my rooms. He found nothing. But the timeline has changed. We may have 4 weeks, not 8. Enclosed is a new witness statement that changes the evidentiary position on the second matter significantly. The witness has standing, was present in the household, and can corroborate the apothecary access and the steward's movements. You will need to receive this through the formal channel before the end of the month." He replied within 12 hours, "I have received the enclosed. I will be honest with you, this changes everything. This is not a physician's retrospective assessment. This is an eyewitness account from inside the household. If this witness can be formally deposed, the criminal case is no longer inferential. It is direct." "You knew about this witness." "I did," she replied. "I did not know she was ready to speak. She made that decision herself." "When will you tell me the things you know that you don't tell me?" A pause. of several hours. Then, when you need them. Not before. The same reason I told you about your brother, when I did, and not 8 months earlier. The same principle. You manage information like you manage a fleet, he wrote back. My father's daughter, she replied. Then, after a moment, he searched my rooms. I am not frightened. I want you to know that. But I wanted you to know he searched my rooms. He wrote back within the hour. One line. I know. I'm moving faster. In October, the Commercial Inquiry Panel issued its preliminary findings. The pattern of credit disruption and commercial sabotage across 9 documented cases was confirmed as systematic rather than incidental. The documentation supported a finding of deliberate and coordinated interference with commercial operations for the purpose of forced acquisition. When Cordelia read the preliminary findings in the morning newspaper, she folded the paper with precise corners and set it beside her untouched tea. She thought about her father. He had been a good man, a careful man. He had built something with 30 years of his life and had refused, to the end, to give it to a man who had no right to it. He had not won, but the refusal had been real. She was making it matter. London, November, Lavenpines 20. The criminal inquiry into the death of Lady Isadora Vale was presented to the grand jury on the 14th of November. Dr. Mail Orins testified in person. He described the medication records. He described the compound. He described his discovery and his receipt of the unexplained payment. He named the banking house. He provided the date. The second medical examiner confirmed the pharmacological analysis. And then, on the third day of testimony, Phineas stepped forward. She was introduced as a former housemaid of the Rothmere household, currently employed in the service of the Duchess of Rothmere. She gave her name. She gave her dates of service. She spoke in the flat, careful language of a woman who had been rehearsing her testimony for 2 years. She described the apothecary. She described the servant's entrance. She described the steward's movements. She described, with the specific precision of someone who had spent 11 years making herself invisible and therefore noticing everything, the exact sequence of events in the weeks before Lady Isadora's death, the household records that Cordelia had retrieved in her first week at Rothmere House, the records she had found in the domestic archive while Mrs. Garvell believed she was reorganizing confirmed the dates of the medication's administration against the dates of Isadora's decline. The grand jury deliberated for 2 days. On the 16th of November, they returned a true bill, an indictment. Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, was formally charged. This was, in the history of England, an extraordinarily rare event. Peers of the realm were charged with criminal offences at a rate of approximately 2 or 3 per decade in this period, and convictions were rarer still. Rothmere received the notification at Rothmere House. He sat in his study for 3 hours without summoning anyone. Then he rose, crossed to the escritoire, and opened the lower left drawer with his key. He read each of the 6 letters and the 2 contracts in the drawer with the systematic attention of a man who was looking, for the first time, at his own architecture from the outside, trying to determine which of the walls were load-bearing and which could be sacrificed. He was thorough. He was methodical. He was, even now, one of the most intelligent people in any room he entered. What he did not find, because it had never been there to find, was any evidence that his wife had been involved. He thought about this for a long time. Then he rose and went to find her. She was not in the morning room. He checked the library, the dining room, the drawing room. He went upstairs to her private rooms. He found Phineas instead. The small silver-haired maid stood in the centre of the dressing room, with her hands folded at her waist and her expression entirely composed, and she looked at the Duke of Rothmere with the specific, direct gaze of a woman who had spent 11 years being invisible and had decided this was the last day of it. "Where is the Duchess?" Rothmere said. "The Duchess left this morning," Phineas said, "for a morning call." "Which house?" "I was not informed," Phineas said. He looked at her for a long moment, at this small, unremarkable woman who had been in his household for 3 years and had never, until this moment, registered to him as anything more than furniture. "How long have you been watching me?" he asked. Finea met his gaze without blinking. "I have been watching this house," she said, "since the autumn of 1815. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened in Rothmere House in 5 years. He turned and left the room. He went back to his study. He sat at his desk. He looked at the escritoire at the surface where the burgundy ledger had sat, that first night, when he had opened it to show his wife his power. The ledger was not there. He had moved it to the locked drawer 2 years ago, as he had told her he would. He opened the drawer. The ledger was there. But something was different. It was open, not dramatically, just open, set down open, as if someone had been reading it, and set it down without closing it, the way you set down a book you intend to return to. It was open to page 29. He looked at that page for a very long time. He thought about the night of the wedding, about the woman in the ivory gown who had read his ledger with the focused attention of someone reading a navigation chart, who had not cried, who had not asked to leave, who had not performed any of the reactions he had been prepared for, who had looked at the methodology of 41 ruinations and had seen something he had not intended to show her. He sat with page 29 for a long time. And then Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, one of the most powerful men in England, the architect of 41 systematic destructions, the man who had bought a wife and believed he had bought silence, understood. He had not bought silence. He had given her the manual. Cordelia was not at a morning call. She was at the small house in Islington held through the charitable organisation, through the specific legal structure she had spent a year designing with Mr. Creed, exploiting one of the very few exceptions the doctrine of coverture permitted. Property held in trust for charitable purposes could not be seized by a husband without the trustee's consent. Finea arrived at 2 o'clock with the travelling case. Calum arrived at 4. He came in plain clothes, as always. He sat across from her in the plain room, without preamble. "The indictment is returned," he said. She nodded. "The commercial inquiry's findings will be referred to the full civil court in January. The criminal trial will be scheduled for the spring term. His solicitors will file every challenge available to them. Months, possibly a year, before any outcome. I know. You will not be here for most of it." "No. The formal proceedings don't require me. I was never in them officially." He was quiet. "There is one thing. His solicitors will argue that the investigation was directed by a party with personal motivation. They cannot prove you were involved. The documentation route was clean. But they will imply it. And Magistrate Wren has agreed to provide a formal statement confirming the independence of the investigation's documentation from any party in the household." He paused. "He also said to tell you that the law that constrained you also, in a specific sense, protected you, and that both things being true simultaneously is something worth knowing." She thought about this. "He is a careful man," she said. "Yes." Outside, November London moved through its afternoon, the ordinary persistence of a city that did not stop for the reckoning of specific men. "What happens to you now?" she asked. "The Reform Committee begins formal sessions in September. A proposal for commercial protection mechanisms for smaller trading enterprises. A framework that would make the specific methodology used in the 9 cases illegal under formal commercial law." She looked at him. "That is the end game. Not just the man. The mechanism he used." "Yes, you designed for that. My father designed for that. He spent 30 years building something that worked because the people in it treated each other honestly. He believed that was a viable commercial model." She paused. "He didn't have the protection. What I want is for the next person who builds what he built to have it." Calum looked at her for a long moment. "I want to ask you something, in plain language." "You always use plain language," she said. "This is plainer than usual." She waited. "I don't know how to do this correctly," he said. "I know how to build a case. I spent 31 years learning to live without anyone who knew what I was actually doing." He paused. I do not know how to be with someone who does. She looked at him. Neither do I, she said. I spent 2 years learning to be invisible in my own life. I do not know how to be visible correctly. Pals. Then we learn it, he said. It was not a declaration, not the kind of statement men made when they were performing feeling. It was the specific, plain offering of someone who had said exactly what they meant and was waiting to see what was true. She said, yes. The same words she had said on her wedding night, in a candlelit room, with a ledger on the escritoire, and the full weight of the law pressing her into invisible. But this time said differently, from choice, from herself, from the woman who had mapped a route through impossible water and come out the other side, still knowing who she was. Caleb, she said. He turned at the door. He will try to make it about me. When his solicitors run out of other strategies, they will try to construct a narrative in which I am the story, the vindictive wife. They will not be able to prove it, but they will try to make it the impression. I know, when they do let them, because a man whose defense is my wife did this, has already conceded that what he did required a defense. He looked at her. The plain room, the November light, 2 years of work between them, built in the invisible spaces of a legal order that had never acknowledged her existence. I will see you in the spring, he said. He left. She turned back to the window. The light was going. The rooftops of Islington were grey and precise against the November sky. She thought about her father. She thought about the maps on the library floor. She thought, I found the route. The light went out. London and the North. Spring-summer, 1821. The trial of Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, in the spring of 1821, is fictional, but the legal and social machinery it moves through is historically accurate. The doctrine of coverture remained in force until 1882. The Bow Street runners continued to operate until 1829. Women continued to operate through informal networks, invisible to the official record, for the entire century. The trial lasted 11 days. Cordelia did not attend. She followed it through Caleb's letters, through the morning papers she read every day at the Islington house, and through the specific, informal network of women who communicated with a precision the official record would never capture. Rothmere's solicitors were exceptional. They challenged every source. They filed every procedural motion available. They attempted to introduce evidence of Dr. Orens's prior receipt of funds as evidence of bias. The prosecution addressed this directly. The payment was the evidence. A physician who received an unexplained sum of money following a patient's death was not evidence of bias. It was evidence of suppression. The jury saw the distinction. On the 8th day, the solicitor's attempt to characterize the investigation as personally motivated was made. They produced evidence of Cordelia's presence at the Barnard Lane Lending Library traced through the loan records of books she had borrowed at approximately the times Caleb's investigation had been developing. Caleb was called to address it directly. Did you receive direction or documentation from the Duchess of Rothmere in the course of this investigation? The defense solicitor asked. I received general background information from multiple sources with knowledge of the Ashford commercial network, Caleb said. The documentary evidence in this proceeding was gathered through formal investigative channels and verified through independent sources. No evidence in this proceeding is dependent on testimony from the Duchess. Cam. But she was a source. Background sources are a standard element of investigative practice. The question of whether evidence is valid is determined by its verification, not its origin. The judge agreed. The attempt collapsed. On the 11th day, the jury returned. Guilty on the commercial fraud charges, 6 counts. Guilty on the charge relating to the death of Lady Isadora Vale, 1 count. The sentencing the following week, significant financial penalties, the formal dissolution of the Rothmere commercial empire under court supervision, and for the criminal conviction. Transportation, exile to the penal colonies was in this period the most severe penalty available for serious crimes short of execution. For a peer of the realm, it was a complete and permanent erasure from English society. His title would survive, technically, but the man who held it would be gone. Cordelia read the sentencing in the morning paper. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about Isadora Vielle, who had been 26, whose death had been entered in the parish register as fever, who had been gone for 6 years before anyone had looked at it properly. She thought about Phinia, who had been 19 years old and had watched and carried it for 11 years and had finally had somewhere to put it. She thought about her father. She thought about the ledger, open on the escritoire, open to page 29, left there not as a message. She had not needed to leave a message, but as a record. Accurate, as her father had always kept his records accurate, as she had kept hers. She folded the paper. She stood. She walked to the window. Outside, the spring had arrived in Islington tentative, the specific, uncertain green of an English spring that is not quite convinced of itself yet. She thought. He called it voluntary dissolution. It was not voluntary, but it is dissolved now. Calum came in the afternoon. He sat across from her in the plain room and said, "It is finished." And she said, "Yes." And the silence between them was different from every previous silence, not the working silence of shared task, not the careful silence of people managing what they revealed, but the silence of a completed thing, which is its own category entirely. "The Reform Committee begins formal sessions in September," he said. "Commercial protection mechanisms for smaller trading enterprises. A framework that would make the specific methodology used in the 9 cases illegal." "Our work," she said. He did not argue the point. "And you," he said. She thought about it honestly. Not strategically. She thought about what she actually wanted, which was something she had not had reliable access to for 2 years. "The Ashford name," she said. "I want it properly documented. My father's work, the 30 years of it, the roots, the methodology. I want it in the record. Not as the victim of a commercial fraud. As the architect of a significant commercial enterprise that operated for 30 years with integrity. That is achievable." And the charitable organization continues. "I intend to build it into something that provides specific support for parties who have been subject to the kind of commercial predation documented in the 9 cases. He nodded. "And," she said, "in 2 weeks, I intend to leave London, for somewhere with honest weather." He looked at her. "Scotland," he said. "Scotland," she agreed. He sat looking at her with the directness that had been his consistent register since the lending library in January of 1820, the look that had never been management, never been performance, always been the specific, uncomplicated attention of someone who was actually seeing what was in front of them. "I don't know how to do this correctly," he said. "I know how to build a case. I spent 31 years learning to live without anyone who knew what I was actually doing. I do not know how to be with someone who does." "Neither do I," she said. "I spent 2 years learning to be invisible. I do not know how to be visible correctly." "Then we learn it," he said. She said, "Yes." The same word she had said on her wedding night, but this time said from choice, from herself, from the woman who had mapped a route through impossible water and come out the other side still knowing who she was. The documents submitted in the commercial inquiry were formally indexed in the court archives in August of 1821. They included, as item 47 inches, the evidentiary record, the private ledger of Daxton Vale, Duke of Rothmere, the leather-bound volume, The Colour of Dried Blood, found on the escritoire at Rothmere House by the attending officers. The index note, written by the court archivist, private record, 41 entries, spanning 19 years, detailed account of systematic commercial predation by the defendant, provenance unknown, found in defendant's private residence, received by the court as primary evidentiary document. The document was found open. Page 29. The following autumn, a brief legal notice appeared in the London Commercial Register. The Ashford Cooperative Trading Network announces the commencement of operations across 5 northern shipping routes. The network operates on the principles of contractual transparency and mutual aid between member enterprises, and is dedicated to the memory of Viscount Edmund Ashford, who understood that the movement of goods between people was, properly conducted, a form of care. Founding Director, Cordelia Ashford. No title, no husband's name, just hers. 3 months later, in a small house on the western coast of Scotland, where the weather was exactly as honest as advertised, immediate, cold, entirely itself, 2 people ate breakfast by a window overlooking water that changed colour with the light. He read the newspaper. She read the shipping manifests. Outside, the sea was doing what the sea does. Moving, changing, finding its level, always finding its level. The legal position described in this story, a married woman having no separate legal identity, no right to own property, sign contracts, or appear in court, was the actual law of England from the Norman Conquest until the Married Women's Property Act of 1882. This was not an extreme position, it was the standard. The women who worked within and against these constraints, through informal networks, through strategic use of the tiny exceptions the law permitted, through the patient accumulation of influence in the spaces the official world didn't bother to watch, are mostly not in the history books. They are not in the history books because the law that constrained them also made them invisible to the record. This story is for them. Like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on more stories like this.